hello, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted, the show where we talk about what you believe and why. I am your host, Objectively Dan, and joining me today is a very special guest, a YouTuber friend of mine. You may have seen him before. We first met earlier this year at the Faithless Forum, where he had 300 subscribers. He is now up to 7,000 at this point. He's doing really well for himself. He's got a podcast as well with Ocean, who has been on the show before. This is Suris the Skeptic, everybody. Suris, how's it going?
Hey, I can't complain. I kind of woke up late and shoved Chinese food down to my throat so you guys didn't have to listen to the munching and crunching while we're on camera.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Thank you for taking the listeners' ears into consideration for tonight's broadcast. So, yeah, Suris, you want to just kind of talk a little bit about your show and your podcast and stuff and what you do?
Sure thing. So my channel's name is Suris the Skeptic, and I've actually got a myriad of things on the channel itself. I also have to cough, if that's a thing that I can do. I love the winter season. But so things that are on the channel, one, there's response videos, because apparently if I don't have response videos, I lose my skeptic card. That's a thing that I've been told is actually, legal precedent.
I mean, I'm still here doing my thing. I haven't done a response video yet, so I don't know, maybe.
But you do nothing but responses to people. They just call in.
You know, that's true. That is true. I do like that, yeah.
I've also got a series called Dangers of Woo, where I try to tackle things like people who think that drinking your own urine is a good idea, anti-vaxxers, and then I'm also going to be doing a video on colloidal silver here eventually. That should be with me and another YouTuber. I don't want to say his name quite yet. But look forward to that when that happens. Also, I have another series called LHack, where I deal with mostly, stands for Let's Have a Conversation. That's mostly for philosophical stuff, arguments for Clifford's Principle, arguments against the various omni-trades for Yahweh, stuff like that. And then finally, I've got my podcast, and that podcast is called Hammered Out, because my channel is known for my avatar having a hammer, and my co-host is a pagan who follows Thor. So again, another hammer. So we ended up just going with Hammered Out as that, where we try to hash out what people's positions are on certain things, why they are there, and just try to get to know people on the channel. It's not a super confrontational show, although it can be if we had the right guest on, but I'm hoping that we don't have to do that anytime soon. We also have, on Mondays, we've been doing a series on the movie Science Falsely So Called. It's a horribly skewed propaganda film from the new independent fundamental Baptists. We've had me, Bionic Dance, Aaron Raw, Jim Hall from Atheist Edge, Nathaniel Walters. We've had a bunch of people on there just tackling that movie. We've also had the Atheist Rationale and Frustrated Atheist there as well, who are regular guests on that part of the show.
Yeah, so this movie thing, this was interesting because I literally saw Aaron Raw just like respond to you guys on Twitter. Aaron Raw talking to you guys, like just saying like, hey, you want to join in on the movie? And he was like, yeah, sure. And you guys just like kind of started watching a movie together, which I think is really cool. But yeah, I'm excited for you to be on. I've been wanting to have you on pretty much since the show first started. I always, when I first discovered your content, I thought, man, this guy is really well spoken. You're really in depth. I think you're really fair about all the things that you talk about, and you cover a super wide variety of topics, which I really like. You're not just talking about, one religion. You're talking about people who, like you said, drink their own pee, which is crazy, and also just the colloidal silver stuff and all this other like kind of interesting things that not all the kind of skeptic channels out there do. So I think you're an interesting guest, and I'm really glad you get to be here on today, man. It's gonna be really fun.
Yeah, it's been the last time we scheduled it, and I was actually in the middle of driving from Iowa back home and couldn't make it.
Yes, you were at Godless Iowan's wedding, yes, if I recall. Yeah, and that was a whole debacle that day. We had to get Jamie on as our guest later on, and it all worked out okay. But you're here now, and I think it's awesome. I'm ready to take. Excuse me. I need to get ready. I was about to ask you, are you ready to tackle some calls? But clearly, I have some own issues I got to take care of. Are you ready to tackle some calls today, Suris?
As long as the phlegm in the back of my throat doesn't keep on trying to assault me and possibly murder me, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Y'all, if you're praying, folks, y'all should pray for that. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to talk to somebody first who hasn't been on the show before. This is Tim calling in from Washington State. Tim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
I'm doing great, Tim. Tim, you wrote into the show earlier today, and you had this really, really great email, and I wanted to kind of read some of it on the air just to kind of give a background on who you are. Is it okay if I do that right now?
That's fine.
Awesome. Okay, so this is in part of an email that you sent me. You said, just a little about me. If I get through tonight, maybe we can go into some detail. I'm a former Mormon / former fundamental Pentecostal ex-gay minister with a theology degree / atheistic druid. My path of druidry is fairly new, about 6 months now, and I'm having an issue with the high priestess of my coven about the fact that I am not really worshiping a god or goddess. This is awesome. That's a lot of information right there, like descriptors in that paragraph that I've just never read before in my life, like in combination together. I just think that's super cool. And I'm so glad that you decided to call into the show tonight, Tim.
Oh man, I'm actually excited that I got into the show. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so like I want to talk to you about this coven thing, but first I kind of want to talk to you about your background. So you were a minister and you were ex-gay, but you're not ex-gay now, right? You because we kind of emailed back and forth about that.
Right. Yes, I got saved when I was 21, and the church told me I had to go straight, so I got married. I have a daughter and 3 grandkids now, and throughout my time in the fundamentalist Pentecostal church, I became a ex-gay minister. I joined ex-gay ministries. My ex-wife knew that I was gay before I had come out when I was about 17. And so went back in at 21, and we worked together in the ministry under the Exodus International umbrella.
Yes,
and I was there for about 5 years, and yeah, that's really about it. By the time I was 38, my ex-wife and I realized that we weren't going to make this work, and God wasn't going to change me because, well, she made me gay, and that's how she wants me to be.
That's really interesting. And at some point during that time, you also got a theology degree in the middle of all that, too. Yeah. Okay. That's great. So, yeah, I've heard of Exodus International before. It's kind of this ex-gay ministry thing where people who claim that they are we're gay and we're kind of saved and stuff kind of talk about those experiences and things. And you're kind of saying that the whole ex-gay thing like wasn't even a thing, like you're still gay throughout all of that.
Isn't that ironic? I just want to butt in for 1 second there. Isn't it ironic that the ex-gay thing didn't happen because you never really deconverted from being homosexual? That's not a thing that happens. And yet it's called the Exodus Project, and yet the Exodus is also something that historians say never happened.
That is interesting.
I like that. I like that tie-in. But yes, it's true. I mean, I can no more be straight than either one of you could be gay. You can't choose tomorrow to be gay. No matter how you can have the behavior, but like I did, I mean, I changed my behavior. I was no longer sleeping with men. We won't talk about the few trysts that I had on the side, but I was able to sleep with my wife and have sex with my wife. So the behavior can change, but who I am never did.
That's really, really fascinating. And it's something I want to explore more so in the future. The whole ex-gay phenomenon is something I'm very interested in, and how that affects people, what people's experiences are in that. But I want to go back to what you wanted to talk to me about tonight. And this was about your druidry. You identify as an atheistic druid now is what I'm reading here in the email, and you're having issues with the people in your coven because you don't actually worship a god or goddess. And just kind of give me some more background about that if you can.
Yeah, when I realized that, and this goes back to my actually leaving the church and doing some study of my own, and of course using my degree in theology to do this study, I realized that gods are nothing more than the anthropomorphication of the natural phenomena that happen out in the world and the universe. And so I'm walking my path of druidry in a naturalistic way, and using the god and goddess form as kind of a way for me to visualize certain things, like during my meditations, using the god and goddess as a kind of a conduit, if you will, for where I want my thought to go, where I want, if I do any magics.
So that means you're a reform pagan then, correct?
That means that I'm what?
A reform pagan then, correct?
I guess that's what it would be. Mm-hmm.
So, Tim, you called into the right show today because Suris has a podcast where he has another pagan on with him, and they talk about all kinds of stuff. So I'm glad that you're here to help parse the dialogue in this conversation.
I've also been to a heathen ritual that was mixed with, it was a heathen bloat mixed with a druidic ritual as well, because they had two different pagan sects coming together to talk it out and have a ritual together. So I've actually not just had a co-host who is pagan, but I've also been to the stuff as well.
Yeah, it's really neat. Okay, so Tim, this is a really interesting phenomenon that we've kind of talked about similar things on the show, but not quite in the lens that I think that you're describing here. I want to know what makes your belief and why you call that druid. If you can just kind of expand on that a little bit, because one, I'm not as super familiar, but also just so that the audience can kind of know what that kind of label means to you and your belief.
For me, it really means.
And if you can, we're picking up a little bit of background noise as well with some, it sounds like some grandkids in the back. I don't know if you can do anything about that, but if you could, that'd be great.
Yeah, we're trying to keep them quiet. They get kind of excited. It's Yule, so we're having a Yule celebration here.
That's right. Today is the Winter Solstice, gang. So y'all come on down, come call about that. We have another caller on the line that wants to talk about that later too. So.
But as far as my druid path goes, it's a way for me to be in touch with my Celtic roots. My grandmother was a direct descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots, and so I really hold to my Celtic roots. In fact, I don't even wear pants; I wear kilts.
Cool.
Every day, and so I get really, really. I guess I'm really in touch with my Celtic roots. And so being a druid kind of keeps me in touch with that. Also, it's nature-based, and I love nature, and it's just a way for me to connect and respect and just something I've always wanted to do. I remember being a kid, being a Mormon, and wishing that I were a druid, which is really odd when you think about it. I was a Mormon who wanted to be a druid. And it was even worse. I couldn't ever say that in my Pentecostal realm. That I ever
certainly not. They would have smited you in the spirit right then and there if they had heard that.
Right.
Oh man.
Right, because that's because there's a lot of things, and I don't know how it is in Mormonism. I'm sure it's pretty the same, but in fundamentalist Christian backgrounds for sure, that call things pagan or call things satanic that aren't actually those things, but they just kind of throw it in there. But you specifically wanting something very specifically pagan, I think is very funny to me, because that's that's the worst nightmare for some people.
Yes, and one of my heroes all of my life was Merlin. I've always loved that figure in the Arthurian legends. And almost as much as I loved Gawain all my life. I loved Sir Gawain. He was actually my favorite character in the Arthurian legends. So everything about Druidry has always been very calling to me, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Cool. Well, Suris, do you have any questions that you want to ask Tim?
Sure. One of the questions that I had, so in my experience when I went to Bloat, granted again, it was a unique experience because it was Bloat mixed with a Druidic sect, which are two separate sides of that coin. Well, more like two separate sides of a multi-sided die at that point. Anyway, hopping off on a tangent. It sounded to me like Dan said that some of the other people in your sect have an issue with the fact that you're following Druidism, but don't necessarily believe in gods or goddesses, right?
Yes, it's actually my high priestess. She thinks that I need to actually believe in a literal god and goddess.
Okay. So the thing that's funny about that is that Druidism is very, very compatible with naturalism. It's very compatible with being a very down-to-earth belief system. It's very strange to me that somebody who's in that belief system, just a different flavor of it, is trying to tell you how you should operate in it, especially considering that unlike when you're dealing with something like Christianity, you have one book where dogma can come from. When you're dealing with something like heathenry or Druidism, you don't necessarily have that. You have a lot of disjointed texts that have to come together for you to find the different poems and the different arcs for all the different gods. There's not exactly the same level of dogma there. It's a lot harder for somebody to say what you should and shouldn't do or should and shouldn't be, because it's not like you have a 10 Commandments to point to or anything like that, which is good. That's one of the reasons I don't mind paganism the same way that Christianity gets under my skin, because you don't have anything telling you what to do, at least in that sense. So I would maybe have the conversation there that said, look, if you're, and I don't know how this would go because I don't know your priestess, obviously. But I would maybe ask her, can you point to where it says anywhere that I have to believe in these? Because there are pagans who believe in the gods, but simply don't have a patron god. They don't have any god that they particularly espouse. They just believe in them and don't try to, pursue a relationship with any one of them. So it seems weird to me that because that structure is not unlike yours. The only difference is you don't believe in them and you don't pursue a relationship. You just view them as constants. You just view them as concepts. It seems like functionally you can go through all the same things without having to do that.
So to add on to that, with my experience, for a little bit, I was hanging out with some Universalists in the city that I lived in. And, I'm coming in as an atheist. The pastor there, who also has a degree in theology as well, is also an atheist. I'd say like 60 to 70% of the congregants were probably the same way. The rest were Buddhist or, some sort of other thing. And it was interesting. There was like the specifics didn't matter as much as the kind of general life path and kind of the general uplifting nature of the kind of congregation was kind of the more emphasized focus. And from what I've heard from pagan communities, and maybe not as much as Druid communities, I'm just not as familiar, it's kind of a similar function. It's kind of like, well, we're already kind of minorities, right? We're already kind of recognizing that we're different from a lot of people, and it's better to kind of build together than to kind of separate. So that is an interesting problem that you have here, and I've never quite heard anything like it.
Yeah, it is very interesting to me as a whole, just because of the fact that we're a very eclectic coven. We've got some that are in the into the Egyptian mythology. We have some that are in the Eastern mysticism, and we've got another Earth Witch that's in there, and my priestess is more voodoo, and that type of craft. And then there's me, I'm the only druid, and have been about 6 months, I guess, into it. And because I'm an atheist, because I don't believe in gods, I'm just finding it much easier for me to stay naturalistic, and picture the gods and goddesses whenever I want to do something or pray or meditate or something, just picturing them to focus my mind on it.
Well, yeah, fiction's useful in that regard, in that even if, like, for instance, there can be a movie with a character who has an objective moral standpoint you agree with. They don't have to be real for them to still be useful, for them to still be something you can channel yourself through.
Absolutely.
So yeah, especially when you're dealing with something eclectic, you've got a bunch of mixing, mashing of traditions. It would seem weird to me for them to say, we can mix and mash these traditions, but yours, we don't like.
So this is what I'm picking up here, because I agree, Suris. I think, you know, the narratives that we talk about, the myth, that can be very powerful for people. And there might be a dispersion here, and I don't know this person. I can't, like, say for sure, but I'm speculating. Maybe this is an identity thing on her part, and maybe your rejection of saying, I don't believe in the same gods that you do, is kind of working against how she identifies and how she practices. And to her, there's some sort of conflict there that kind of can't be because, like, maybe because in her eyes, because I've talked about this with people who are Christians before, like, oh, why do Christians get so offended when I talk about atheists? It's because to some people there is like this idea of, oh, I'm actively rejecting your beliefs by claiming non-belief in them, you know?
Not. It's like you're not an opposer to their belief system all the time. Sometimes you just go, you have a belief system, it's incongruent with mine, but it doesn't mean that we're incongruent as people. And it's right. Weird to me that people always view it, not always, but a lot of times view it as an opposition. And you don't just get this in religious sects. You get this even in just like video gaming culture. When somebody's like, I like PlayStation, you have another person who says, I like Xbox. And these two people just sometimes just end up fighting each other over which one's better. And it's like, wait, hold on. Are you trying to make the other person prefer something?
Yeah, it's gatekeeping. It's gatekeeping, right? It's trying to keep the ideology pure, or, you know, whatever affiliations you have in that community. Like, you want everyone to kind of think and feel the same way you do, because otherwise there might be conflicts, at least in their minds, right? Like, obviously, it seems like you don't have a problem. It sounds like you're surrounded with people who believe some very different things from you, and you're okay with that. So I don't know. I guess the way I would approach this conversation is just to say, hey, look, I'm doing the same rituals as you guys. I'm hanging out with you guys. I feel something from this. This is meaningful to me, and I want you to see things from my point of view, how meaningful this is to me with the beliefs I already hold, and that I don't have to necessarily have all the same beliefs you do to still get something from this kind of, you know, organization that you've formed. That seems to me the most logical way of going about it, because like Suris is saying, like, there isn't anything that you're doing personally that's harming people that we would say is harming. I think it's something that maybe she has to kind of figure out, you know, but I think having an honest conversation about it is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, and we have had that conversation, and I think she's still wanting to try to get me to really believe that Kerninos and Diana and greed actually do exist.
Does she know how beliefs work? Because we don't actually get to elect our beliefs. Those are things that we don't necessarily choose. I can't choose today to believe the Earth is flat or believe that Australia is not there. I can try very hard, and I can run through the motions of pretending, but I can't believe it, no less than you could believe that you actually weren't gay, no less than you were able to abandon that part of yourself. Beliefs are the same way. They can change, but they can only change when you've been thoroughly convinced. And nobody can convince you by just saying you should. Nobody can convince you by giving you evidence that you've already either dismissed, verified as, you know, something that you shouldn't be worried about, anything like that. Nobody can change your belief structure that way. So maybe I am a somewhat confrontational person. So the dialectic I would have there is not one that I would recommend you have. But I would be the type of person that says,
do as I say, not as I do, right?
But in that situation, I would have the thought process of, look, everybody's okay with what I'm doing. I'm okay with what everybody's doing. The common denominator here, though, for having problems is you. And if you're the common denominator for the problem, then maybe you are the problem. Not you specifically, but your priestess.
Yeah.
Right.
Granted, I don't know if I would necessarily take that tack if I weren't myself. Because that's how I handle things.
This is how I would handle it. I think I would just keep doing what I'm doing until she brought it up again. And if she brings it up again, you say, hey, you want to talk about this? And you establish right away, you say, are you willing to consider things from my point of view before we talk about this? Because if this conversation is going to go, I need to talk to you until you think I'm right, then that's not going to work, right? You need to reach something you can reach together, because getting kicked out of a group, especially when you already feel like there's only so many people that can relate to you with your experiences and you get something out of it. I mean, that's something that you're a part of just as much as she is, even if she is, the leader or high priestess or however she wants to, identify herself, because that's you're a part of that. So, yeah,
and I mean, one of the things that I had thought about actually telling her if she ever pushes this again is look, I really enjoy looking at my God as Kerninos and looking at my goddess's breed. But I don't believe that they exist any more than I believe that the God of the Bible exists, that Jesus was ever born, or that Santa Claus exists. I think that they are just as much mythical as are Zeus and Odin. And I don't see them being in actual existence. They are personifications of nature, and they're man's personification of nature.
Yeah. I can definitely get behind that, for sure. That definitely makes sense to me. I think we naturally go through narratives and narrative structures and use them to kind of guide ourselves, sometimes for better or worse, right? Like we have this construct as Americans that we are like a nation of immigrants and that we're all part of this kind of collective. And so we have these certain freedoms that we like to uphold. Like there's a narrative in being a U.S. citizen there that you can see and that other cultures can see and can also adopt once they come here, right? So I think it's kind of the same way with what you're talking about. You find power in these things, even though there is no literal God beings that you're talking about here that you think exist. And I don't think you have to justify it to me. It certainly makes sense. And I know Suris has definitely talked about this before on his show. Yeah. So anyway, I was going to say this was a really awesome call, but I think we're going to go ahead and go to our next callers here. But I hope this was super helpful, and I hope that you got something out of it. And thank you for sharing your experiences on here. This was really interesting and really unique.
Oh, no problem. I was looking forward to doing this, and it's like, I want to share with Dan, so I'm going to call.
Yeah. Well, tell you what, if you want to keep in touch with me and go ahead and email me and tell me how those conversations go, we'd love to read on it next time we meet on the show, and talk about that a bit more. For sure.
All right.
Thanks, Tim. You have a great day.
Okay. You too, sir.
See ya. Cool. Druids, man. Interesting stuff. I'm not used to that. I know you're used to that. I'm not used to that.
Yeah, I grew up as a when I grew up, even as a young Earth creationist, one of my best friends was a pagan, and another one of my best friends was a Wiccan, and at least one of those friends I still have to this day. So like, that's just all stuff that I've dealt with. Growing up.
Man, I tell you, dude, I just grew up, a good old Texan Christian boy. I wasn't used to
Texan Christian boy.
Good old Texan Christian boy. Like I was just not around that stuff as much. It's very, very different world. But like I never would have pictured myself having a conversation like this, even like 5 years ago. I think it's great. But speaking of the solstice and that kind of stuff, I guess, we're going to go ahead and go to Karen in California, who wants to talk to us more about the solstice and the cult of the dead is what I have written here. Karen, what's up?
Hi, Dan. Hi, Suris. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks again for calling.
Well, actually, I wish I'd been on that last call with you because, as I mentioned when I called before, I was a pagan priestess for 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on both a druid path and a heathen path. And I thought that Thor and Odin and Breed and all the other gods and goddesses were real. I was a hard polytheist. And I thought I found I didn't start out that way, but that's the way I became after worshiping for a long time. I thought it was kind of curious that Tim was in that situation until I saw that he was in Washington. And I think you both understand that Christianity has a lot of different flavors all over the country, and there's a lot of infighting. Well, that's also true of paganism and heathenry and Wicca. And Washington has a lot of what they call hard polytheists. And hard polytheists is when somebody believes the gods are real. I used to be one of them. And in fact, we even did a whole podcast once against atheists because we were so frustrated with the atheists that were among the pagans. That shows where I come from. I'm an atheist. But for me, being an atheist was incompatible with paganism and heathenry eventually. But what I wanted to say to Tim is there's actually a lot of druid groups that accept atheists. And if he were to look around, he wants to get involved with that. You mentioned the Unitarian Universalists, and they actually have a subsection called CUPS, CUUPS, where you can be a druid and also be an atheist. The same is true with the Reformed Druids of North America, which are very, very agnostic and atheist. And then I belong to an organization called Andreophane, which is a druid organization, also called a Druid Fellowship. And it is also, that organization does not dictate belief at all. It's completely orthopraxy, and not orthodoxy. So if he wanted to look for an ADF group or an RDNA group up in Washington, he could probably find people of more of a like mind. It's also in Druidry, it's very unusual to have something called a coven. Usually they're called a grove, and they do have high priests and high priestesses, but they call themselves mostly just Druids. So anyway, I had to throw that out there.
I think the reason that his was called a coven, though, is just because it was eclectic. So he had Wiccans in there as well as various other forms of pagan, and he was the one druid amongst the group.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think from my experience, you have to be very strong when you're in those kind of groups because sometimes not having people that are on the same wavelength as you can be really difficult. And as you know, in all religions, the person that's the head cheese is the one who winds up kind of trying to call the shots. It's not supposed to be that way in a lot of pagan groups, but it is.
Yeah, that's with any organization, though. You know, I mean...
Right, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I love, Karen, when you call in because you always come in with the most informed, like, you just give me so much information, and I'm sure the other viewers really appreciate it because this is just, you know, like, this is stuff that I can read about sometimes. And, you know, but it's not the same when it's coming from somebody who is talking about their own personal experiences in these groups and talking about what it's like in the real. So I always appreciate it when you call, but you were wanting to call about the winter solstice and stuff, and I'm kind of curious about that.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to let you know, I have a degree in anthropology, and I spent many years in paganism, and I also went to seminary and so on. So you know, I'm going to tell you right here in Sacramento right now, it's really dreary. It's all dark, and today's the solstice, the shortest day of the year, and there's a lot of Mexican Americans in our area, and they practice a custom called posada. And I wanted to talk about the cult of the dead. Now, I know Christians don't think of their religion as a cult of the dead, but as I was explaining to my Jewish husband the other day, if you were to walk into a church and go to the front of the church and see this dead guy hanging on a cross who had been tortured, that looks pretty much like a cult of the dead, I think, to anthropologists. So the reason I'm calling about this is I thought it would be interesting to talk about some of the customs of Christmas and what they actually shield us from. Now, in ancient times, you know, we don't think about this being Americans and having 24/7 electricity and light and everything. But back in ancient times, and if you've ever lived in Northern Europe, you know, it gets dark around 3 p.m. And it's very cold, and they couldn't, in ancient times, they couldn't keep the food supply up very much in the winter. So Christmas, which was originally a pagan, I believe it was originally a pagan tradition, although it was added on to by the Christians later, was very much about death and the cult of the death. And I know that Suris has a co-host called Ocean, so I'm sure Ocean would be able to speak to how Odin, the god Odin, was actually the god of death, who went around during the winter on the wild hunt and harvested souls of people that were dying naturally, well, not naturally, but it was more natural in the sense that when people died from the cold and hunger, you know, it was part of the seasonal experience of humans. And I guess the point I'm really trying to make here is that Christmas is a festive time that keeps us from feeling that despair that a lot of us feel during the holiday. Today, I was just so down, and I didn't know why, because I have no reason to be down, really. But I think this is something that we as atheists should be addressing, because what are we going to, how are we going to address so many people that cling on to these ancient beliefs? I think a lot of people become religious, and so was I, because we're looking forward to an afterlife.
Yeah, there is something to be said about atheists celebrating Christmas, right? And just kind of the holidays in general, for people who don't swing in the Christianity kind of way, I guess. There, you know, because we're surrounded mostly by people who do believe in these things and who take these kinds of rituals very seriously. Most of us, myself included, by the way, are going to be forced to go to church on Sunday because, well, I say forced. I'm letting myself go in. I mean, I'm an adult. I don't have to, but I want to participate because I want to be there with my family, and I want to, be a part of the ritual and have it something be meaningful for them, right? And it's awkward. Like, there's no real way, there's like no general advice I can give to people that says, here's what you should do, because like every family situation is different and everybody has their own kind of traditions and ways of doing things. What are your thoughts on this, Suris?
I'd say for me, the argument's been made time and time again that Christmas, or pretty much all of these holidays that occur around this time of year, whenever somebody gets upset that somebody says happy holidays, it's like, well, you know how many holidays we actually have here, right?
Yeah.
More than 2.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that they've been pretty much successfully secularized, at least here in America. At least the idea of Christmas has. Because when you think Christmas, the first thing that comes to mind will either be Santa Claus or will be Jesus, and a lot of times both. For a lot of people, it will be both, and one of those is most certainly more secular. Although there are some arguments that Santa Claus and Odin are kind of very similar. That the Saint Nicholas tradition was kind of pulled over from him, if memory serves.
Yeah, I think, but you bring up this point, Karen, about how like this is a dreary time of year, just like seasonally and also like economically for people as well.
Right.
And
I think a lot of our religious beliefs are actually based on it, and we don't always realize it. Like for example, Postada, I was reading that the Mexican tradition, the Catholic Church capitalized upon it to bring Christianity to the people. And I just, my background was in Mesoamerican archaeology, and I just wanted to read this little bit here from history. It says, according to Aztec cosmology, the sun god Huitzilopochtli was waging constant war against darkness. And if the darkness won, the world would end. To keep the sun moving across the sky and preserve their very lives, the Aztecs had to feed Huitzilopochtli with human hearts and blood. And I really think that
sounds more like Halloween than Christmas, if you ask me. But
sounds delicious.
Yeah, I know. I realized that. In fact, I knew this one woman. Her name's Holly Cannon, and she's a wonderful singer and songwriter whose background is in folk music of Britain. And she said at one of her concerts that the reason that Christmas was so big in the British Isles was that it was actually a law of the noblemen to feed the people during this time. Because when you have a society where it grows dark early and everybody's hungry, the noblemen were obligated to make sure the serfs kept alive, basically, because who else is going to work the fields later, right?
Who's going to pay taxes at that point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So this was like during a feudal society where the wealth was really held by just a few people. And it was also people just became depressed. And I know this seems like maybe, in our culture, we don't think how important this is. But if you think about a lot of the people that keep clinging to religion, which is a lot of untrue things. I mean, I think you and I would you two and I would agree that Weitzel Polkley does not need to wage a war in heaven to keep the sun coming back during the solstice, right?
Yes.
So in order to get rid of some of these ideas that are bad ideas, I think we need to address human needs.
Absolutely.
And I don't even know where I'm going with this. I just thought it would be interesting to bring it up because you're talking about truth wanted. We want things to be true. We want to believe true things. But there are human needs that are more emotional and more intuitive.
Oh, Karen, you're hitting on my heartstrings here because I identify very hardly as a humanist. And I put that on the forefront on a lot of what I do. And I consider Truth Wanted to be a humanist project because I want to address human needs first more than anything. And it's kind of like been a life purpose for me to address it in the ways that I can. And one way of doing that is doing the show, but also in just everything I do, I want to incorporate people into human community and let people learn about human culture so that they can all understand that there's this beautiful tapestry that we're all kind of a part of as mankind, and the people need to realize that. And this time of year can be so hard for people, especially because when you feel like you're not a part of that tapestry, when you feel like you're outside and not looking in.
Feeling ostracized is horrible.
Absolutely, yeah.
When everybody else is happy around you.
And there are like real scientific things we can look at to kind of address some of those issues and put it in kind of that perspective. I mean, like if we're talking about like suicide rates, for example, and we know why they're happening at this time of the year, we can see like I know one of the highest rates of suicide in the country is in Alaska. And that's kind of interesting. You can look at that from different perspectives. You could say maybe it's the lack of, in general, these people are living in sparse populations. That might be part of it. It might be the part of the area of the world that they're living in. It's kind of colder. It's darker a lot of times of the year. And you can see that the human contact, essentially, and human togetherness is vital to our personal health and to our growth. And we don't often address that as secularists, atheists, pagans, whatever you want to call it, because, well, it's just not something that's in our narratives. We don't always have the narratives to do that. As a Christian, you're able to do that because you're joined together in the body of Christ for a service and remembering the death of your Savior that you collectively hold to be true. And that's something that we don't have. We have to navigate our own ways through our own friends and family. And if it were up to me, and if I were to build a secular community to help address that, I would say there are new narratives that we could probably give ourselves, new ways of thinking and unifying us. One way that I like to do it is just being here in the ACA. I like talking to the other people and the other show hosts here, and I'm a part of this community now, which is really awesome. I want people to be a part of the Truth Wanted community. Like, I want that to be a thing. Maybe that's what we need, is more people getting excited for Truth Wanted. But it's an interesting perspective that I think more of us could hold, is this idea of viewing human problems through being fixed by human communities, right?
Right. And Suris and Dan, maybe you can answer me this question. When you go home to visit your family just during Christmas and you feel a little lost and out of place, how do you handle that? I'm asking for myself too, because, I really love Thor and Odin. I did. I just adored them. I want them to be real. I still want Thor to be real. Who cannot love Thor, right? But at this hot time of year, I think it's kind of tough. You know, I don't have my pagan friends around me anymore. And when I do go to people's houses for Christmas and they're praying to Jesus, that's just not really where I'm at.
Mm. Suris, why don't you go ahead and go first, because I went on a little tangent there.
Fair enough. So for me, generally what it comes down to is I'll be as respectful as I possibly can, as long as there's nothing that's directly infringing on me. So everybody bows their heads for prayer. I will be silent. I will let everybody do their thing. If somebody wants to say, hey, it's the reason for the season, well, it's one of them, one of the like 50-ish maybe. So sure, I can give that and I can kind of just let all that slide. Unless somebody specifically tells me what I should or shouldn't do on that holiday, which luckily in my family, that's not something that really happens, then I would say at that point, you can just kind of, you know, be as respectful as possible and be fine. It does suck, though, a little bit to feel like there's that part of that holiday that you're not really able to participate in as much. Because for me, you know, like 2 years ago, my mom sent me I think it was a nativity that we got. She was like, here's your first nativity. And it was like a year and a half after I became an atheist. And I'm just like, well, this is awkward. So there are certain portions of it that will suck and feel like you can't really participate in if the culture that you're going back to is one that you've left in a religious sense. But best thing I can ever find is just to be as respectful as possible.
So you just triggered a memory in me, Suris, that I completely put away. It was last year for Christmas. My mother got me a Christmas ornament that said something about, like it was referring to like the wise men or something. And she like and there was some little thing about how wise people follow Jesus and stuff. And she got this for me, I guess, like after she had, or before she had kind of figured out what I was doing with my, you know, faith transition. So, and gosh, I guess I put that away because that was such an unpleasant thing. And
then it just kind of came flooding back.
Yeah. And, you know, that's got to be the experiences of a lot of people, probably even worse than that, of going home and not being able to feel like they're at home anymore because they aren't a part of these traditions and can't talk in the same language as well. I think that's also an important point. The way that we communicate with each other is also going to be different. So solution-wise, you know, if there are other friends you can spend the holidays with, I say go for it. You know, spend time with the people who care about you and who can accept you for who you are. You know, you always have to remember that most people who have these beliefs, a lot of them mean it sincerely, and the fact that they reject you is just more their beliefs talking sometimes than them. Sometimes it is them, but not always, right? And I try to remove myself from that equation of, you know, when I'm talking to my parents about these kind of religious concepts, because in their eyes, like, I am a son who's going to hell, and that's not fun to think about. But yeah. I don't blame them for that in that sense, because I mean they're great parents in every other respects, but you have to kind of navigate that, and that's tough.
Yeah, that's why I have a whole video on my channel dedicated to whether or not the idea of hell is a threat. Just the idea when somebody's coming at you with salvation, is the idea of hell just the underlying threat whenever somebody comes to you with the word of God in air quotes.
For sure.
Well, Dan and Suris, I really appreciate talking today. You're both doing great work, and I appreciate this show. And Suris, I watched a little of one of your podcasts today and found it very interesting. I'm going to go back and listen to more. Thanks for talking to me, guys.
Karen, thanks so much for calling. What a great call. And I wish you a happy holidays with your friends and family. And be sure to call again sometime.
You too. Have a great holiday season.
All right. Nice. Nice calls. Good stuff today.
Nothing horribly egregious. Just fun conversation.
Nothing horribly egregious. This is a good day. It's the holiday season, y'all. Everyone's in the spirit. We're all having a good time. Talking on Truth Wanted. Man, we still got 3 more calls on the line. I'd love to get to all these calls if we can. We might have to speed it up just a little bit, but I want to talk to now Charles in Fort Worth, Texas. Charles, can you hear me?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey, Charles, how's it going? I have a thing here saying that you're you wanted to talk to us about Vikings and some other things. Pagan issues.
About that. I was just listening to all the other callers. It's pretty cool. Tonight you have all the pagans calling in.
I know, right? That's really neat. It's just a pagan themed show today, I guess. I'm down with that.
It's just the Truth Wanted Yule edition.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, one of the ideas I had for this show was I really wanted each episode to be kind of a theme thing. But of course, at first we wanted to try to get as many callers as possible and try to get as wide and diverse an audience. But hey, if we're on a theme today, let's keep going. I love this stuff. Okay, so Charles.
So what would y'all like to talk about?
Okay, so what I have here is pagan issues, spells, heritage, and Viking bloodline.
Oh yeah,
that gets into an awkward conversation.
Yeah, what I found out is because I used to be a Christian back when I was in high school, and then I got kind of kicked out of the church because I was born different and I had a birth defect, and they were like, "Oh, well, people like you don't go to heaven." And so I was like, "Well, dang!" I was like, "That sucks." I was like, "So what am I going to do for the rest of my life?" And then so I started doing some background check on my DNA, and my lineage, and it just led to one thing to another, to the Danes, to the Vikings, to the Swedes, you name it. I mean, and I was like, okay, well, if I'm connected to the Vikings, I was like, what did they believe? What was something that they would spiritually believe in? And it led me to, well, they do have wizardry, but I went more shamanistic.
Okay.
And, the cool thing is I got a little bit of Native American, and that led me to shamanistic practice as well. So I'm heading the right direction.
Interesting. Suris, did you have comments on this?
So it didn't go the route that I thought it was going to go, which is good, because the other route was very unpleasant. There is actually a lineage issue with paganism that comes up. I don't want to say them by name because it kind of gives them a little more power and presence, but there is one set of pagans who believe very heavily on lineage to the point of almost white supremacy. And it didn't go that route, so that's cool. We don't have to talk about them because they're bad people.
That's okay. So, gosh, the pagan heritage is becoming a bigger theme in my life, I guess, because I keep having people calling about it and stuff. And I love that people want to talk to me about this stuff when, like, I'm clearly not an expert, right? Everything I know is just from reading a few things, but I don't practice. I never have. I know people who have it. I'm glad Suris is on to talk about this. I noticed on here, though, you did talk about spells, and that's kind of interesting. Do you have, like, a spell practice yourself? Is that something you do, or?
Well, pretty much the only spells I pretty much do is, first I do a lot of meditation and work with, like, crystals, and we have, like, special rocks that we call spirit rocks. And I pretty much, like, if there's any kind of spells I do, it's usually working with herbs and, like, things that are going to, like, make my body a lot better and, like, a lot more balanced. And I think that's the big key in life for me, is to find balance in life.
Okay. Suris, did you do a video on this kind of topic? Yeah.
I actually did an entire video.
I did something on this on Talk Heathen. We got into it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a video that I did on my channel on the idea of people who use not the people specifically, but the idea of using stones for healing and stuff like that. So I guess my question would be the idea of using herbs and stones to balance your body. That sounds incredibly vague to me. Do you think you might be able to clarify that a little bit?
Well, the stones, like I have a black stone that's supposed to take, like, the negativity out of your body, and then another one might be for positivity, and another one might be for health, and each one, like, represents a symbol of something that I want in my life.
Okay, and I guess the real question there is, do you think that the stones themselves are doing it, or just the ritual of doing it helps?
Probably a little bit of both, because the main thing is I like to use the elements, and I feel that that fire gives us energy, that earth gives us energy, water gives us energy. So the whole earth mixed with all these elements is like the essence of life, and everything that comes from the earth that you can use it in your practice. It actually can help you reach a better understanding of life, and then like more of a balance.
I'd say at that point, and I don't want to be the person that tells you what your belief structure is or isn't, but that sounds more like the ritual itself, like the act of doing, is what's causing that for the most part. Whereas for instance, we know that different stones vibrate at different rates. This is why we have watches that use quartz. But we also know that for the most part, those stones don't have any actual effect on the human body, with some exceptions. Uranium is one of them. Don't go grab uranium. That's a bad thing to do. But we know that the stones in general don't necessarily do a whole lot for the body. But we do know...
That's the one thing I could say is I don't actually use anything that's going to harm me or harm anybody else. So that's for sure.
True. I think the conversation is less about harm and more the underlying principle as to why something functions. In all the studies that I've done on this particular topic, it seems that the ritual of doing something, laying the stones out in a particular pattern, if you're having it done by somebody else when they lay them, sometimes there's practices where they lay stones on you in order to try to relax you. I think Reiki does a little bit of this. Sometimes it's just the act of doing something, and doing something methodically, that gives these positive effects. But what's actually happening is that the thing that you're doing isn't what's actually causing it usually. Usually it's the fact that you're doing something ritualistically, that you're doing something methodically, that leads to that.
You can kind of imagine like an OCD person who might get something out of cleaning something or doing something. It's not the cleaning itself that's doing anything for them. It's the act of it, kind of. Is that a good comparison?
Oh, yeah. I had a friend like that where she had to touch like the doorknob like 13 times before she could open it and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So it's like the doorknob isn't actually doing anything there. It's the act itself that's more important.
Well, the interesting thing about me though is like if I take my hearing aid out and I take my shoes off, and let's say somebody's playing music or something, we were talking about vibrations and stuff. It's kind of interesting. Like people are like, how do you hear the music or feel it? And I'm just like, I can feel the vibrations, and they're like, that is so cool. I'm like,
I mean, that's exactly how your eardrum
I think
works.
it's because when I take the hearing aid out, I'm more mostly deaf than anything. So maybe I'm feeling the vibration because I'm deaf.
Right. Right. So like Suris was saying, like that's kind of how the eardrum works. We're picking up on vibrations in the air, and that's how we understand kind of sound. And also it can go through objects as well, which is kind of neat. So
I mean, that's how we're all talking right now. It's just electronic signals.
Yes, exactly. The sound in
that stuff fascinating.
The sound in the air is going into the microphone, which is being converted into an electronic signal that goes back into like a physical signal into somebody else's earbuds right now. And that's how people make ASMR videos.
Yeah, and it's like the hearing aid's like an in my ear.
Can we? One day we need to do a Truth Wanted ASMR, and like the entire episode, we're just gonna whisper like this.
We're just gonna do this.
Yeah,
this will relax you. Don't worry.
They're gonna kill me in the audio engineering room over here if I keep doing that, probably. But yeah,
more than likely. I'll wake up tomorrow and Dan's head will be on my doorstep, and I'll just be like, "Oh, is that a message? Is that a warning?"
Right. So Charles, let's get to something with this conversation here. When you're doing these rituals, how confident are you in the actual objects itself are doing something for you, or it's just the act of the rituals? Like which way do you lean on either one of those?
I would say it's what I use in the rituals, and it just kind of makes you more of a calm, kind of like you reached a goal.
Okay. So kind of confused there. Is the act of reaching the goal, and the doing kind of more important? Because it sounded like at the end there, you said at first it was the objects, but then at the end there, it kind of sounds like the doing part.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything.
Okay. What do you think, Suris?
And I still hold that because I've researched this topic and I've talked with people who both believe in it, or used to believe in it, or never believed in it at all. And the consensus seems to be that the only people who ever are actually affected by the individual, like the individual rocks and what they're supposed to do, are the people who already believe in what that rock is supposed to do, or have been told what that rock is supposed to do in some capacity. My suggestion would be take, and I know that this feels a little manipulative, but to figure out which one it is, this is one thing that you can do in science. And I don't advocate for scientism. I don't think science is the answer to literally everything. But one thing you can do is kind of apply the scientific method a little bit and take a few people, tell them that the rocks that you're using do different things.
Yes.
Using different rocks. Like you tell them that, rock 1, 2, and 3 do X, Y, and Z, and you maintain that. The only difference is rock 1, 2, and 3 would be different rocks. Some that you don't think have any different type of power, some that have a power completely opposite of what you have been told or think that a particular rock does. And if you get a marginally consistent feeling of euphoria or calmness from all the people that you do this to, that kind of can cement at that point that it's not the rocks that are doing it. The rocks themselves aren't actually causing any vibrations in the body that are doing what you think they're doing. It's just the act of doing this that is calming, or the act of doing this that is doing it.
I think that's an excellent test. I'm reminded of a BuzzFeed video I saw where they were attempting to demonstrate some things with astrology, and they got an astrologer to come and talk to, I can't remember how many people, 10 different people or so, and kind of check to see how many of the beliefs, so the idea was he didn't know what any of the people's signs were, the star signs were, and he had to guess based on some of the information given to him about each individual person what their star signs were. And I think they were only able to get like 2 or 3 right or so. With the amount of guesswork there, and there may have been some tricks and stuff that they've done to kind of tease out some information. I would say to me that's not as impressive if it's only a few out of the 10. Like if you're studying this stuff this whole time and you're really good at it, you should be able to like pick it out, at least most people, most of the time. But what do you think about this test, Charles? Do you think this is a good idea?
Well, I'm not sure. Actually, I'm a solitary witch, so I only do it by myself. So I wouldn't even know who to test it on.
Fair, although that does sound almost like an unfortunate way to create an echo chamber for yourself. Is not being able to practice.
Oh, to be practice by myself. Well, I don't have nobody telling me what to do and how to do it. I mean, everybody kind of like showed me like this is how you start. This is if you do this, A equals B, and then you get it ends up giving you the final product of what you're going for.
Well, that's like the first caller that we had, who one of the issues they had with being in a group of people who followed a lot of the same rituals was that some people in the group wanted them to believe or wanted them to practice in a very particular way that they did not. So I can understand that side of not wanting to have.
When you're solitary, you have the freedom, and that's what a lot of solitary witches or practitioners like about it.
Yeah, well, Charles, I know you're a solitary witch, but if you have any other witches that you know, you need to get them to call into the show, because we haven't talked a whole lot about witchcraft. We've kind of dabbled in it some more, but I want to get more into the nitty-gritty of what some witches do and how we can kind of talk about that more and see.
Oh, yeah, there's so many of them. There's Wicca, Wiccans, there's just regular pagan witches, and there's North pagan witches, Celtic. I mean, the list. Some that practice Egyptian.
Yeah, the list is quite extensive.
It's a pretty big list of practices.
So I want to kind of wrap up this call here, but I want to ask this kind of final question to you before we let you go here. And if you have a response to it and you can tell us here, great. But if not, like some of the maybe the take home with you is, do you think that these beliefs or these practices and their claimed effects are verifiable in some way? And do you think that the way that Suris has outlined is a good way to verify it? Like yes or no to that. And if it's like a no, then like what is a better way to verify that these practices are working the way that they're intended or are essentially true, right? Or if there's some sort of other explanation for the effects that you're seeing for these practices?
That's a good question. I pretty much, when I do my practices, I feel not really a connection with the gods, but it's more of a connection to the ancestors, and I get an enjoyment out of that. So I think that's the main thing why I do it.
Let me ask you a harder question then. I know I said that was a final question. Let me ask you a tough question.
Okay.
Are feelings a reliable way of telling us about truth?
Well, no, you can feel something, but of course you want to do research and make sure what you're doing is the right way, and anything you can always add to it, because knowledge is wisdom, and wisdom is always a good thing.
Because the reason why I asked that, right? Like I'm sure you know, most people are pretty aware of like the placebo effect, right? This idea of things can give us effects that they don't actually do through their own, through the property of the thing itself, but it's just ourselves kind of projecting the effects of the object, right? Like if you're taking sugar pills and you think that they're helping you with something else, but really it's just sugar pills and they're not doing it. It's kind of like we were talking about earlier, it's the act. How can we be sure that what you're doing with your practice is not one of these cases? How can we be sure that this isn't some sort of placebo?
That's actually a good question, because dang it, what was I going to say?
Oh, Charles, you there?
Not sure how to answer that.
Great. Well,
kind of drew a blank on that one.
Hey,
that might be one of the things, and this is not us trying to be antagonistic. Obviously, like my co-host is a pagan. I have no, I have no want to be antagonistic in this sense, because it doesn't sound like what you're doing, even if it is placebo, it doesn't sound like what you're doing is harming anybody. It's just a ritual that you practice for yourself.
I don't think it's a placebo. I mean, it's more of like because more than anything in my rituals, it's more meditation. So it's not. It's not in any shape or form, just trying to tell somebody, hey, this is what you should believe in, or how you should practice, or how you should live. It's just say, hey, if you're stressed out or life is getting you down, here's a good way to find, a common way and a good way to find balance in your life.
Well, here's an interesting thing that you mentioned, Charles, because you talked about meditation, and I think meditation totally works. I think that there are scientific studies that totally demonstrate meditation, but the mechanisms by which how meditation works, I would disagree with some people. For example, Hindus and Buddhists, and it depends on the practice, right? Because there's totally different sects, but there are some people in sects within those various religions who think that there are spiritual applications going on when you do meditation, that there is something metaphysical happening when you're performing these acts. And I think we can at least demonstrate to some level that meditation is something that we're producing ourselves as kind of a byproduct of our own efforts, and not necessarily something spiritual, or not necessarily something metaphysical or anything in those realms. And you're talking about this thing that you do, your own practice, in kind of the same language that we're talking about meditation, where I think that there can be a distinction made, as I don't necessarily believe that when I do meditation, and I have done it myself, that anything spiritual necessarily is going on. That there's...
Well, you could meditate and not really look at it as spiritual, or you can look at it as being spiritual. But like you being atheist, you can just be like, hey, I just want to get a cool state of balance in my life, and that's why I meditate.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yes.
Because I have friends that are atheists, and they don't believe in the gods, or there's atheist pagans, and then I'm just like, okay, it's like
absolutely. But do you agree with me?
The cool thing about it is we all just talk about it, and then we just figure out what can we do to help one another.
But do you agree with me, Charles, when I say that finding balance and saying that this is the reason why I do this is different from me saying, oh, the reason why I do this is because these crystals and herbs actually have a power to them? Like, do you see that there's kind of a difference between these two?
Well, the herbs and minerals, I usually take those like vitamins and stuff, and they actually do help because I got good blood, good iron. I mean, other than my disability, everything, internally is really good. So that part works.
I actually did a video on supplements and herbs as well. That was actually this week. There is, like, for me, I've had to take supplements before because I had a vitamin D deficiency for a decent bit. Probably still do, but I haven't gotten it checked out in a while. So there is at least in the supplement category, in the herb category, there are some applications.
Got something. I always got to watch, the acidity in my body because that affects me.
Yep.
Well, anyway, I think we really should move on now because I said that there was a final question and I ended up asking like 5 more. But I'm glad that we did because we got to talk.
Shame on you, Dan.
I know, right? But we got to talk a little bit more about this subject. So, Charles, I hope that you got something from this conversation. I know that I certainly did. And
I quite enjoyed it, Dan. I mean, y'all are awesome. I enjoy your show, too.
That's awesome. I'm so glad. I want to hear back from you. If you want to talk, like Suris mentioned his test, if you want to try something like that, or if you had more comments about that, you can definitely email me. My email for everyone out there is truth@atheist-community.org, and that's for all kinds of inquiries about the show or whatever else. Or if you want to call back sometime, that's cool too. But I'd love to hear a follow-up on this conversation to see if your beliefs have changed at all, if this conversation's done anything for you, or if you just feel the same way that you feel before and that life's still good and you're still doing your rituals. What do you think, Charles?
Okay. Sounds good. Or we can always talk about near-death experiences because I had one of those, and I kind of would love to hear another person's point of view.
I'd like to hear that sometime. We've talked a little bit about near-death experiences on the show before, but more stories are welcome. But we're going to have to move on now. But thanks, Charles, for calling. This was really fun.
All right. I'll talk to y'all later.
All right.
See you, Charles.
Yes, Suris, you... I keep going to you because it's like, oh yeah, Suris does a video on this. Yeah, Suris has talked about this before. He can talk about this. Like you've talked about it all, man.
I've tried to be somewhat all inclusive with the stuff on my channel. That's why I've made it a point to tell people on some of my videos, hey, if you see more of something over here that you want to see, send me an email. And this week I tried to catch up on some of the emails and Twitter responses I've gotten to make videos on their stuff. Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to have a conversation about confirming and disconfirming what we think is true. And we seem to do it pretty well. Like, I'm not sure how much any of us have budged on this topic or if any of us have been convinced on the other. But, like, I feel like there was some movement made some way or the other. And I think we were able to do that without being, antagonistic at all. And I think that's the main thing is that, like, if you are antagonistic, there's a time and place for it. There's obviously always going to be the Hams and the Hovens of the world where the antagonistic approach is like the final bastion. Right. It's like, this is all that's left with you. But I think for most people, we're just people that are living in the same world trying to get along. The antagonistic approach isn't going to convince some of those people. Sometimes it's more just, hey, let's talk on the same level. You're a person, I'm a person. I think so too. Our experiences. Absolutely. And here's the thing, right? If what Charles is saying is true, and there is some sort of ritual that he can take from this where the actual objects themselves, not just the ritual, but the actual objects themselves have some sort of power, I want to know about that, right? Like, I want to get on that and get me some of my own rituals going on and take advantage of that. And I think that should be... that's something anyone should consider, right? At least having a conversation about it for sure. Yeah, if something works and it's helpful, then that's great. But the only way that we can ever find out if that's the case is by verifying it and testing it and figuring out, hey, is this a thing that works for you, or is this a thing that works?
For sure. For sure. So we're going to go ahead and go to Greg in Baltimore. Greg, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Cool, cool. So I have a note here that's saying you want to talk about secular humanism and how it leads to veganism.
Yeah, yeah. Hi, Dan. Hi, Suris.
Yeah.
Suris, I never thought I'd talk to you. I've seen a bunch of your videos and was surprised you were on and happy to talk to you.
He's a cool guy, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, cool. So give me your thesis here on how you come to this conclusion. I'm very curious.
So basically, it comes down to some basic biology. Generally, across all animals and our systems, only about 10% of the energy from any system after it gets consumed by something else gets transferred into that next system.
Yes, we're terribly inefficient at that.
Yes.
Exactly. So every time we're adding extra steps in there, we're creating all this lost energy. And we have millions of people on this planet who are starving to death. And so if it takes 10 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of cow, isn't it in the best well-being for humanity to grow 10 pounds of grain for people to eat than to grow 10 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of cow for one person to eat?
I think so I agree and disagree for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
So one, the analogy as itself functions, but it is missing some nuance. First of all, grain doesn't have the same amount of protein that a pound of beef would, as an example. And now granted, there obviously is something that me and Godless Island, who's in the chat, would both say is like the wonder food of the world, peanut butter. So that does in fact contain a lot of the nutrients that you need. But I do understand that the analogy isn't supposed to have the nuance. The nuance is implied. So I do understand that. I do think that right now, as the world is right now, there are some people who, for them to even survive, they do have to have meat because their body can't metabolize plant-based protein.
I definitely agree. There are. This is as a general. I'm not saying specific to every human being.
Okay.
I like. There are people who need to be on a keto diet. There are people who have all sorts of other medical needs and stuff like that. And so it's not. But I feel like as an ethical view and a way to view the world, we're trying to lessen the most. We're trying to create the highest amount of well-being for as many people on the planet as possible.
True. And I think that comes down to what food can provide the most amount of nutrients. Because if we use the grain example, obviously that can only get you so far. You do need protein, you do need certain vitamins. If we can find a food that we can mass produce, and not just mass produce, but mass distribute, that's the biggest problem. Because like here in America, we don't have a food production problem. We produce plenty of food. Our distribution, however, is what needs some help, because we have, for instance, as soon as our food gets even mildly old, I was working at McDonald's, and this was years ago. When I was working at McDonald's, if your burger that was sitting in the hot tank was 15 minutes old, it had to be discarded, and it had to be thrown away. And they have rules in place that are there to make sure that you don't overproduce so that the crew can eat, or so that you can give, or you can redistribute that meat elsewhere. They don't, that way you don't end up cooking like 20 hamburgers, knowing that you'll sell 5, so you have 15 to give away. There is a a capitalistic issue there where there's profits and they're very important to that company. So obviously that rule had to be in place to make sure they didn't just lose money. But at the same time, now you've created they've also created a rule as a result where that excess food now cannot go anywhere. It cannot be redistributed. So I think that production wise, that's not the biggest issue we have at the moment. Right now, it's just what's the most fair way to distribute that food. For me, in a perfect world, when that food goes bad, it would get tossed into a freezer, right? Like after 15 minutes, that food would get tossed into a freezer because we can do that with leftovers at the house. So you can definitely do that at a fast food restaurant. Take that food, get it all in the freezer.
I feel like you're still having that same issue of, because like 70% of the crops grown in the United States are made to feed animals or feed our livestock and not feed people.
Yeah. Greg, I want to hit on something really quickly because this is very, very interesting to me. We're talking about secular humanism specifically as like the kind of ethics we should be referring to. And this is a criticism that I've heard of secular humanism, which I think is very interesting in that should secular humanism include at the top of the kind of hierarchy of needs humans, or should we include animals as part of like, oh, these are living beings that we should work towards? I'm sure there's a better name for what I'm describing here, but like, are humans at the top of this chain and that a human life should be considered before all other animal life, or should we consider animal life on the same level to some degree as human beings, and therefore they should be afforded some of the similar rights and so forth? And I think that is something you have to address first. If we're talking about the root of this kind of issue on where are we putting the sort of different beings that we see on Earth on the scale, and what is the most important? Because I hear from you, and probably what I share similarly from you, is that human beings kind of matter the most, and I would like to the most part, like I think agree with that, unless you have some sort of, unless you defer from that or you have some sort of nuance to that view.
So personally, I think humans are animals and we're all worth the same because we're all just animals. That's my personal view. But for this argument, I'm putting that entirely aside, and I'm saying we need to take care of people first.
Okay.
For this. And then so when you have situations where, you know, we could make enough food to feed everyone on the planet. And that's not my only part of it. I mean, there's several other things about this. It's also how much water has to be consumed in order to feed all of these animals and raise them, and transportation and distribution and everything. You know, vegans use up a lot less fresh water every day, exponentially less fresh water. And so because of that, you know, fresh water is becoming a bigger concern across the world. I realize distribution is a huge setback on all of these things, and that there are a lot of advances need to be made across distribution. But I don't think our inability to distribute properly changes the idea that we now have the ability, as well as the ability, to stop a lot of the major killers just in the United States alone. You know, heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States. Even the American Heart Association is coming out and saying a plant-based diet is the #1 way to protect your heart. It will actually take the cholesterol that is blocking your arteries, and your body will rip it out and save itself. And these are what some recent scientific studies are showing. And so some of these horrible things that are killing millions of people a year, we can stop. And I want more people to live and live better, healthier lives.
Okay, so if I could break down this argument just a little bit more, in order for people to live more healthier and healthier lives, essentially better lives for all humankind, your proposal is that veganism will help accomplish that goal a bit more. In order to live healthier human lives, veganism is the option, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
I think what it comes down to is that, and I've seen this conversation before, and I do generally agree with it, is that there's not really a good moral standpoint for eating meat. I do eat meat, I enjoy meat, but I do understand that as a moral ethical issue, it's not exactly one that you can hop up on and pilot very easily. I do think though that even though you do admit that the distribution is one of the biggest problems, right? Because we can produce a few things, we can produce a lot for the world, but the problem is if the farms that are growing, like say there's farms in the United States that are growing 70,000 pounds of beef, and they're using all this fresh water, that's fair. That's a fair criticism. But what would that fresh water be doing otherwise? Well, if we can find a way to get some of that fresh water down to a country that's maybe their only source of fresh water normally is a river that is polluted with bacteria, they don't have a good filtration system, getting them either a filtration system built up or getting them some of that fresh water, that would be a worthwhile thing to do. But again, that comes down to our inability to really distribute these things in a way that's not only profitable for the companies that would end up doing it, because that's really the only way to convince them to do it, unfortunately.
Okay. Let me ask you this, Suris. I'm going to ask cross-examine Suris here for a second.
Sure.
If everybody became a vegan tomorrow, like everybody just decided that could, right? That was able to, and it wouldn't negatively affected their health. Do you think would be sustainable?
Not immediately, because right now the food infrastructure that we have is set up to where we have several acres of land, several thousands of acres of land that are being set up for the production of meat. Once you stop those beings from being consumed, which we agree is a thing that should happen eventually, I'm a big proponent of lab-grown meat as soon as we can make it cost-effective. You can't immediately get rid of that infrastructure. You're going to want to convert that infrastructure into something else, and that's going to take time. So if we could have everybody transform into vegans or vegetarians, because I would be more for vegetarianism, because that doesn't have the same it doesn't have the same dietary problems that veganism does. You have more access to different types of protein. If you could convert everybody in a single day, I would not want that. But if you could do it over the course of 10 years, enough time for that infrastructure to be repurposed correctly, so then I would be okay. So
Suris, this is interesting because convincing people is already a hard thing to do. Convincing people to change their diets is already hard enough. I almost think that maybe, shouldn't we try to, if the premise and the conclusions, we agree with that veganism is good for everybody, which is something I actually agree with. I don't know. And it's not something I'm going to defend here or argue against. But let's say that this premise is true and this is a goal that we want to work toward. And this is what Greg wants. And it sounds like that's what Greg wants. Shouldn't we be doing our best right now to try to get people to become as vegan as possible, or to become aware of the ethical concerns that happen when we eat meat and stuff, to make those changes happen? Wouldn't you say that maybe that's part of how we make the process of changing the infrastructure and the way that our meat consumption works happens by changing our diets now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cruelty, because that's a thing that we know goes on in the meat production industry, and I don't think anybody denies that, and it's a thing that needs to be stopped.
People deny that all the time.
People what?
People deny that what happens in the animal meat industry is not cruel. People deny that all.
Well, they can be wrong, and that's fine. But the fact of the matter is that we have tons of videos that showcase what happens to these animals inside these factories. We have videos of pigs that are getting electric shocks before they die, so they're dying in terror instead of just being humanely euthanized. You're already going to consume the animal. The animal's already going to get consumed. How it dies should not matter as long as you can still be efficient. So a painless death and giving it a good life is much better than giving it an electroshock at the end. There's videos of people stepping on, I know this is going to be kind of graphic, I'm sorry, but there's videos of some of the farms that McDonald's has used for their chickens, and people stepping on the chickens and harming them without undue harm, not the harm that's going to come when they die and are harvested, but just undue harm to the animals. We know this is a thing that happens. Anybody who's willing to do an ounce of research can find this. So if you're excluding the people who still have these dietary needs where they do have to consume meat, because we are omnivores, if you're excluding them from this conundrum, you still have the problem of animal cruelty, and that still needs to be addressed. If I had a choice, I would say the problem of animal cruelty would need to be addressed first, and then slowly move into the dietary thing. Because with animal cruelty, you can fix that more with policy, whereas with diets, you have to work more on an individual basis. And it's a whole lot easier to influence policy than it is to influence, just in America, 375 million individual people.
Well, I mean, we can also influence policy by, you know, not giving stipends for dairy farms and give those stipends to people who are producing soy or almonds or all these other things. There are a lot of policy ways that we can do it as well.
Yes, you can definitely influence the production of other methods of gaining the vitamins that people need to survive. But that all again, that comes down to influencing policy, like you said, which is easier to do. It's hard to do. I'm not saying it's hard to do, but comparatively, it is easier to influence policy than it is to influence several individual Americans at once.
Yeah.
There is something to be said, though, about when you're making policy, right? Like how that happens and how policy even happens in the first place is because several convinced people are, in effect, making those changes, right? Whether that's members of Congress or whether that's members of your local city council, there is some convincing that does have to happen. So I guess the way that I'm kind of looking at this question and the way that I think other people might want to look at this is the act of talking to other people and starting it with yourself, because I'm assuming, Greg, that you are a vegan yourself and you want other people to be vegan. Like I totally get that. And I'm super sympathetic to that. And I'm wondering, like, maybe this is a question for both of you guys, because this is taking a very different turn from what I thought we were going to talk about. But like, what is the best way if we're convinced that veganism is what's best for people? Is it like what Suris is saying, is like we have to wait for a policy change, or does it come from talking to individuals? Like, how do you think that process works? Because Suris, I don't know what your dietary things are right now. I don't think that you're vegan. You said before that you weren't, but like it sounds like you're also kind of sympathetic to that, at least, as well.
You know, I do eat meat, but I am sympathetic towards the idea. And as soon as, for me, if I had a choice, a financial choice, because that's where some of this is going to boil down to, if I have a choice to get lab-grown meat that can give me the types of things that I do enjoy in my day-to-day life, then I will gladly do that. And I know that strides are being taken to that, so you can get a lab-grown meat burger, so that you can get lab-grown meat that feels like it's got bones and stuff in it for stuff like chicken wings. When you're able to do that in a lab, which we are able to do, it's just a matter of production. Unlike the previous issue, which is a matter of distribution, then I will just go, okay, cool. No, technically I eat meat, but it's not meat that was ever grown as an animal. It's not meat that ever had sentience. I'm willing to do that based on my dietary needs right now. That's perfectly fine with me.
I still feel like with that sort of a situation, you're still running into the health problems of cholesterol and these other things like that by eating the lab meat.
True, but that doesn't all come down just by meat. Meat is not a cholesterol builder by itself, because you can get that also from things like eggs. You can get different types of cholesterol from different types of food.
Don't follow through. Eggs are not vegan as well.
Well, they're not vegan, but they are vegetarian.
That's true.
Interesting.
That's you know, and that's why I was trying to put forth an idea of veganism that is entirely based on human well-being, increasing the health of all humans, and increasing, you know, and that sort of a thing, and not look at, you know, like, oh, well, this is good and it feels good and I love it. And I get that. I was such a meat and potatoes person. I was one of those people. I was like, you can't put enough meat on this plate for me.
So, Greg, let me ask you, if you could give a number one reason or several reasons, like on the spot right here, on the reason why you're vegan, I would love to hear like your number one, like what makes you a vegan?
I'm personally a vegan for animal rights issues.
Okay.
I used to work in an animal shelter, and I felt like a complete hypocrite spending all this time and effort and working so hard to save dogs and cats and these couple animals. And at the same time, I'm paying people to do things that I find an abomination to these other animals. If they did that to a dog or a cat, I would want them thrown in jail. Okay. They're doing things that are that horrid. Like, a lot of states have laws in effect that say if this is a standard of the meat industry, it is not animal cruelty.
I see that.
And that sounds very like as an argument in your favor. That sounds incredibly arbitrary for somebody to say this is okay as long as it's a standard here, which is equivalent to saying this is okay as long as this is a law. Which, if that was ever true, I don't think that's ever been true. If that was ever true, then that's an argument for slavery in the United States right there. It must have been okay because it was once a law, but it must have been okay because it was once a standard. But that doesn't make it okay.
To me, it sounds like special pleading. Either dogs and cats are special and they deserve our special care, or that sort of thing. We're just saying arbitrarily.
Okay, yeah. So your thing is about consistency with your ethics. It sounds like animal rights are important, and we should treat them with a certain level of consistency and stuff. And it's that consistency, like dissolving the discrepancies beforehand and becoming more consistent, kind of led you to become a vegan. Like that was kind of your conclusion based on that stance.
Yeah. And it wasn't like something that I was like, I'm doing this cold turkey. I went vegetarian for just over a year first, just trying to ease my way into it. I want to be a realist about this. I want everyone to live better lives. Basically what it boils down to. I want to not be cutting down the rainforest so that we can grow cattle there. Like, I want to stop killing the lungs of the world. Like,
At that point, though, you run into another issue entirely, which is it's another conversation. It's not one that I think we should have here because it's a very, very long one. But you run into the problem of overpopulation because you don't need to constantly take more land to produce more food if you're not also having to fill a quota of feeding X number of people. You run into the conversation of overpopulation. That's not a conversation for here, because again, that has got to be one of the biggest bag of worms with some of the biggest ethical concerns out there.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I agree. Which is why I wanted to, when I called it, I specifically told the screener, I was like, I'm not wanting to talk about animal rights, at least in this discussion.
Sure. But I think it's fair to say that animal rights were a gateway for you to become vegan. In some sense.
It gave me a very visceral, emotional response, and it made me decide I need to look into things. And then when I saw all the health benefits and other things, and I admit right now it isn't the easiest to get a perfectly balanced diet. Well, I mean, Amazon's great for supplements and things. It's not as easy for a lot of people to do that because they got to take a certain amount of vitamins and stuff. But it's also just as easy to enrich our foods with things like vitamin D and vitamin B12. And there are a lot of ways to do it. And I realized I'm proposing a very long road to try and make the world better.
Okay. I love that. I think that's great. More power to you. I'd love to have more conversations about this kinds of stuff in general, just because one, I'm ignorant to it. I'm ignorant to everything really, but it's something that the atheist community has kind of had like some run-ins with veganism and vegetarianism in general, but the conversation hasn't always gone the whole way, and I'd like to see more of that happen. Charles, I'm sorry to call you Charles. Greg, I would like to ask one more question and then just go ahead and move on so we can get to our last caller. And this is kind of just a verification question about how you got to the beliefs that you do. And this is, if your stance on animal rights were to change tomorrow, if someone were to convince you that we should not take animals as seriously, that they are not as good as humans basically, and that animals, we shouldn't give them the same level of care that you would want to give them right now, would that change your position on being a vegan? Would that influence your veganism at all?
Not really, no. After learning a lot about the health benefits and the health problems that go along with a lot of the other things with eating meat and stuff like that, no, I don't think it would change.
Okay, because it sounds like you have other reasons for your belief then.
Yes,
cool.
The animal rights was my gateway that got me into it. And then once I got into it, it opened up a world of ideas that I had never been exposed to.
Awesome. That's cool. Well, we had kind of a round robin conversation here. That was cool. Greg, if you want to call in and talk more about some of those other reasons, I'd definitely be interested in that. Hopefully some of the people who are watching this would also be interested in that, because I think that's cool and it's something that we don't always talk about. So next time, if you want to call in about that, I say go ahead and do it.
Okay, thank you. I might do that.
Cool. We'll see you next time, Greg. Yeah, fun stuff. I'm pretty sure I've already said it before. I'm not a vegan right now. I've tried a couple different diets before, and to not super great success. But it is something that goes through my mind, and I think probably other vegans would also say that it's kind of a process for a lot of people. Most people don't do the cold turkey thing. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it right now. I couldn't give a stance on it either way, I don't think.
No. Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think my stance was given there as well as I could articulate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a fun conversation to have, and I'd love to have more conversations for it. But let's go ahead and get to our last caller tonight. This is the Godless Iowan calling in from Iowa, of course. Godless Iowan, what are you doing here?
Well, I would just like to ask, why couldn't your guest afford a comb?
Oh, damn.
Oh, boy. No. I wasn't aware that we were getting a heckler, Matt.
Oh, my goodness.
No, seriously, I wanted to call in and basically just say that I love this show. And Suris is one of my best friends in the community, and it's been so fun seeing him grow and, just getting into YouTube together.
That's awesome. Well, you're Godless Iowan, you've been on the show before. Actually, our episode last week that we released was the one where you were on. And so it's happy to hear another voice in the community come back and call in again.
Yeah, sure. No, just keep doing this. This is awesome.
Thanks, man. Really?
I'm just upset that I have to listen to your voice again. I just did an entire show with you yesterday.
Jeez.
Why are you here?
You guys are mean.
You love this voice. This is the voice Dan, you listen to fall asleep at night.
That's because it's that boring. Yes.
Oh gosh.
No, Dan. You should have listened to the first 10 minutes of our conversation on my channel yesterday. Was like just Godless Cranium probably just watching both of us going, is there some kind of sexual tension between you two?
We need to get GC on the show. I haven't messaged him about it, but he should definitely be on. Y'all should hook that up for me, honestly.
I bet he would.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I'm glad that you got the call, Godless. I hope that was. I hope you got your point across, and I hope it was a good call. Very short, very to the point.
My point is he needs a comb.
All right. Yeah.
True. Well, it's very true. The only person who's ever successfully combed my hair has been Pam, because, well, technically you that one time. That was weird.
Don't tell me about your weird hair combing stories, guys. I really don't want to hear about it, and this isn't really the platform.
You don't want to hear about it?
I don't want to. Okay, we got to end this now. This is too much. Thanks again for calling, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you guys. So funny. Well, I think that about wraps it up for another episode of Truth Wanted. Thanks again for everybody who called into the show. I look forward to hearing more about what you guys think of the program and stuff, because this is the last episode of the year. We are going to start doing them again in a few weeks now. We'll let you know if you follow us on the Facebook page for Truth Wanted, and if you follow me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan, we'll be putting more updates on there as to where the show is going from here. We have recently figured out how, there's a look of our crew. They're saying hey. Now you can't see that for the audio listeners, but yeah. I know. Somehow I convinced these people to come sacrifice their Friday nights to make this show happen. I don't know what it was. But anyway, yeah, so if you are interested in seeing where the show is going and stuff, definitely follow me on those social media platforms. I want to make a few changes for next year. Of course, I want to get more and more rotating guests. I think this has been a really successful concept, and I'm going to keep it up. But I want to try a bit more with the clip stuff. Recently, if you guys caught our live stream last Sunday with Genetically Modified Skeptic, you would have saw my lovely face on there, along with a bunch of other creators from the community. And we were able to play some video stuff because we figured out how to do that with our systems here, which is fun. And I want to try to do that with our show here, too, because I think watching clips and commenting on them is really fun.
I thought you said you didn't do video responses.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, and we also had to figure out how we're going to do that for the audio listeners and stuff. I think we're going to figure it out just fine, though. But yeah, this show has had an interesting run this year, and I think it's been a success. I've really enjoyed doing this, and it seems like everybody else has enjoyed it too, so look forward to seeing more episodes this coming year. Thank you guys for everybody who has contributed to my Patreon. That's patreon.com/truthwanted, where you can get some exclusive content from there, as well as versions of the show that are ad-free. You can also find this show on Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah, we're on Spotify. I found that out a few weeks ago, and that's radical. I think that's cool. I use Spotify all the time. That's like my favorite thing. Yeah, so like I said, keep in touch with me. You can also do that at atheist-community.org. If you want to send me emails, I look at every single one that goes through here. If you want to be on the show and you are a member of the community of some kind, I love to hear that. If you have suggestions, if you need some advice, you just want to talk to me, go ahead, send me an email. I'm pretty friendly. Suris, how can people find you?
So if you want to find my content, you can go to youtube.com/Suris Skeptic. You can also find me on Twitter, which is at Suris Skeptic. I also have a Facebook page for my channel as well that I hardly ever look at, but I do read messages when they come in there, and I respond to messages on there. You can also, my email address is in pretty much every single video that I've ever produced, so that's another option that you can use. But to find that, you're going to have to actually watch one of my videos, because shameless plugging.
Yes. No, this is plug time. That's what it's for, guys. Well, cool. I think that about wraps it up for another episode of Truth Wanted. Suris, would you come on and do this again sometime? I really enjoyed having you on.
Oh, I most certainly would. I was surprised that we didn't get any Christian callers this time.
We did not. It was a pagan day, and that's cool because Winter Solstice, man. That's what it's all about. Well, cool. All right, that about wraps it up for another episode of Truth Wanted. Remember, everybody, always keep wanting the truth. We'll see you next time.